Okay, Assalamu alaikum everybody. Good evening and welcome to the hustings for the European Parliament election for some of the London candidates. I especially want to thank the candidates for being here. I'm sure they're very busy in their campaigning schedule. And for the candidates' assurance, although the numbers are not large here, the idea was that we have representatives of the different organizations. The organizations covered are the Harrow Mosque, which has got quite a large congregation, a few thousand. We've got the Sri Lankan Mosque and this organization, SICM. So be assured that they will take the feedback and pass it on to their congregation. We're also recording this event, so if anybody wants a copy, you can come back to us. Yeah. Okay. Before I get to the candidates, I just want to give a brief explanation of the election process, which I think will be useful in how you look at it and how you answer your questions, how you ask your questions. For the London region, there are 8 seats this time. In the last elections, there were 9. Overall, I believe this total seats for the UK have been reduced, and I think over the EU as well. And for London, this time there's going to be 8 seats. So most of the parties have put a list of names. 8 candidates, and depending on the number of votes they get, that's the number of candidates that will go through. The good thing is that it's proportional representation. So if you think about the turnout last time, it was only 37%, and basically on average, each candidate came in by 150,000 votes. So when you think about that London-wide, 150,000 votes is not a lot. I believe there's more than 600,000 Muslims, and those that are capable of voting, there's like 400,000, so that's quite a significant number. In the last election, there was 3 Labour, 3 Tories, 1 Lib Dem, 1 Green, and 1 UKIP. So that basically gives you an idea. It's a proportional representation, so it is significant how you vote. Okay, the other thing is I'm just going to briefly introduce the candidates, and then I'll basically leave it to them to expand on themselves. So I've written a small resume for each candidate, and I'll just go through. So I've got Mary Honeyball, who is a member of the Labour Party. She's actually an MEP at the moment. She's been an MEP since 2000. She's second on the list, so she's quite high up on the list this time as well. Before her election to the European Parliament, Mary's career was in charitable and non-governmental sector. During the 1980s, she ran the Council of Voluntary Service in the London Borough of Newham, and then going on to work as a senior manager for SCOPE, the cerebral palsy charity. Mary is the UK Labour representative in the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee in the European Parliament. She's also a regular blogger on women's rights, religion and politics. And then I've got on my left Mahfil Ali of the Green Party. Shar is the 3rd on the list of candidates for the Green Party. He's a policy coordinator for the London Green Party and has worked as a researcher in the European Parliament, and is an advisor to the Greens in the city, in City Hall, sorry. Mahfil Ali was the lead author of the 2008 Green Manifesto for London. He has been involved in several London campaigns and has been involved in anti-war marches and pro-Palestinian campaigns. Hope that's okay so far. Okay, and then I've got an independent candidate, Sohail Rahman. Born and raised in London, Sohail grew up in a working class environment and completed his formal education at university with honors degree in business economics. Sohail later developed himself into a business consultant, gaining expertise in asset management, dispute resolution, investment financing, and construction. Sohail has been consulted in various statutory bodies, including the police force, NHS, community group, schools, and the media, on issues concerning racism, culture, education, policy, and terrorism. And last candidate, but not least, is Christopher Le Breton. He's for the Lib Dems. He's 4th on the list. Chris is an environmentalist, entrepreneur, and campaigner. Born in Africa, he became aware at the age of 14 that he would dedicate his life to sustainability and to changing the relations between Western society and indigenous ones. Chris set up the European Commission's Environmental Aid Unit for the former Soviet Union and has worked as an environmental advisor for the EC around the world. He is training as a leadership coach, nurturing budding entrepreneurs and leaders to save the planet for humankind in partnership with the Be the Change organization. I hope that wasn't too long, and I guess I'll leave it to the candidates to talk about themselves. So I'm going to start with Mary and okay. What I'm going to do is, if we give about 5 to 7 minutes for each candidate to talk, and then at the end we'll just have a question and answer session. Okay, so can I start with Mary? Should we take it up? You prefer standing up?
Yeah, I think I do prefer standing up. I feel very little without my shoes on, but never mind. Anyway, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you and to talk to the Muslim community in this area. I mean, I do recognise, as your chair said, just how significant you are in London and that you will be in this election, which is why I'm so pleased to be invited to be able to talk to you this evening and give you an idea of what Labour's policy is on issues which I think will concern you. So I want to start by talking about equal treatment and about how we in the Labour Party, the Labour government and Labour MEPs have worked to bring about equality and to do everything that we can to end discrimination. It's been something I've been particularly concerned about, living in London and recognising the multicultural nature of London. I felt that it was something which was very important to take to Europe and work on in the European Parliament. When I first became an MEP, we were working on revising Article 13 of the Amsterdam Treaty, which sounds very technical, but it actually was about ending racial discrimination across the European Union. And that particular piece of legislation introduced rights of citizenship. Although that didn't particularly apply to the UK, to Britain, because we always had given, particularly people who come here from Commonwealth countries, there hadn't been any question about citizenship. And anyway, people who come into Britain can gain citizenship after a certain amount of time. That actually wasn't the case in many other European countries. And there were countries where people who had come there as immigrants stayed like that, and that was their status, and they never were given rights of citizenship. And that was particularly true in Germany, where Turkish Muslims actually were in that position. But we changed that in the European Union, and now everybody has that right of citizenship, and that was one of the first things I got involved in when I became an MEP. We have continued that. We've just passed a report outlawing discrimination in the sale of goods and services, which means that people cannot be discriminated on grounds of race, religion, or sex or gender. So that again was another very important anti-discrimination move. The Labour government, as you all know, has also worked hard on these issues, passing a law to outlaw incitement to racial hatred as one example. And I'm sure you will realise what the Labour government has actually done in terms of minority rights. And that is something that we are all very proud of and that we have worked hard on. One of the things I did in the European Parliament with some other MEP colleagues was introduce a written declaration, or sign a written declaration at least, on the wearing of the hijab in public places. This was a few years ago, when it was particularly in France, where the wearing of because of French history, religious symbols are not allowed to be worn in schools or other public places. And we felt that this was very discriminatory against those who had reasons to wear religious symbols. And we did actually introduce a written declaration, which is a bit like an early day motion in the House of Commons, about wearing the hijab. Sadly, it didn't actually get enough signatures to get through the Parliament, but it is an issue some of us are keeping, including myself, are watching and keeping an eye on, and we will do whatever action we think is necessary for that. That, I think, is maybe some of the things that applies particularly to you as the community in London, but I obviously need to talk to you about other issues and what we believe in as Labour MEPs, and one of those things is very much equality, equality of treatment, equality of opportunity. And one of the reasons that I became involved in politics was when I was a young woman. It's a little bit different now, but when I was younger, women just were not very much in public places, and I felt it was important to do something about that, and that's why I spend a lot of my time in politics fighting for equality and equal treatment for everybody, so that we end discrimination and that everybody actually can be treated the same. And I think that's very important, and that's one of my basic political beliefs. But of course the economy is very much part of that and is a concern for everybody at the moment. And I think there are two things in the current situation that we are finding ourselves in which will have to be dealt with at European and international level. There are more than two things, but there's two things I specifically want to talk to you about tonight. One of them is the economy, because the recession, the credit crunch, what's happening at the moment is not just a British problem, it's a global phenomenon, and it needs to be dealt with internationally. The other is the environment, where obviously pollution, emissions, environmental problems know no national boundaries, which is why the European Union and Labour MEPs have been very involved in environmental issues. We've been very much involved in the fight against climate change. I have done quite a lot of work on carbon emissions, particularly on emissions from cars. I actually had a reporting committee a few years ago to try and make cars greener, and it's been a particular concern and something that I feel it's important to take an interest in as a London MEP, because we must be one of the most polluted cities in the European Union, which is one of the reasons why I think London MEPs need to take this issue seriously and work hard at it. The last thing I want to talk to you about briefly is consumer protection, which has been one of my major interests while I've been an MEP, and it's a big thing that the EU does and something which is not talked about very much. Food labelling. When you go into a supermarket and you buy food and you see ingredients and nutritional information on labels on food packets, that came from the European Union. That was European legislation that brought that about. I've worked very hard on telecommunications, and one of the things that I was very involved in was reducing mobile phone charges to other European countries. So when you go abroad, your mobile phone charges last year and this year will be an awful lot cheaper when you phone home than they were in previous years. And that's thanks to the European Union, and thanks to the work that I've done and other MEPs have done. I can see you're saying I should wind up, so I will do. Once again, thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. It's okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Mary. Can I have Sohail speak next? Are you okay with it?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, I hope you don't need me to stand up, because then I'm going to be holding this with one hand. I think what I don't want to do today is to tell you how important the European Union is. It is very important, and I'm sure the other MEPs and the other political party candidates here are going to tell you about that. What I want to ask you today is to reflect and think over the last 30 years, when Britain has had elected MEPs, how many times have you been consulted by your MEPs? How many times have you been consulted by the people who claim to represent you? From my experience, and I've canvassed people up and down the country, I can't find yet one person who even knows who their MEP is. Most of them don't know that they've got more than one, and almost all of them don't know what on earth they do. Now, you've heard that the European Union has passed various bits of legislation, such as food labelling, which is an excellent initiative. If you read the directive of the European Union, it says it has consulted extensively about food labelling. how many of us were consulted on this great initiative to ensure that food labeling had the word halal on it? I think none of us were. And indeed, there is no halal category on food labeling. I've also spoken to Jewish communities and asked them how many of them were consulted to ensure food labeling in Europe has the term kosher on it. Indeed, none of them were consulted, and obviously it doesn't have the term kosher. I've asked the Vegetarian Society of this country, and the Vegetarian Society of this country is probably the most prominent vegetarian society throughout Europe. And we've seen suitable for vegetarians on lots of foodstuffs in this country, and we make our purchase decisions based on that. How many of us were consulted to ensure that suitable for vegetarian was included in the food labeling? None of us were consulted, and indeed it's not on there. So unfortunately, where Britain is leagues ahead of the rest of Europe, the huge amount of specialism that we have in this country with our diverse communities was absolutely not consulted in any way, shape or form in order to protect our interests and also to protect various minority interests in Europe. I understand there's over 30 million Muslims in Europe, and that particular part about food labeling was not dealt with. We've also talked about the hijab, and we've heard about how France has banned the hijab for school children, for people in schools. And they've banned it to the extent that they will allow a bandana, providing the ears are shown, but they will not allow the covering to go past the ears. Now we've heard how this is, French are saying that this is a religious symbol. How many of us were ever consulted whether a hijab is our religious symbol? Does anyone know of any Muslim organization that puts the hijab as a symbol of Islam? Never seen it in 1500 years of Islam. It's never been on the front of any mosque. It's never on the flag of any Muslim country. The hijab is not our religious symbol. Since when has it become our religious symbol? I've seen documents from this country's security services that say that our beards is a manifestation of our fundamentalism. Did anyone consult us about that? Never. So have they consulted us? What France has done is quite simply applied a racist law. Let's not try and excuse other countries' racism. And there is a huge undercurrent of racism within Europe, a huge undercurrent. It was that racism that caused the Holocaust of the Jews. It was nothing to do with Muslim communities, it was nothing to do with Israel, it was nothing to do with Palestinian people, it was nothing to do with Iraqi people or Iranian people. It was to do with European people and the European xenophobic culture. Now London is far advanced in culturally speaking. I would say London is, as far as a culture is concerned, as diverse culture is concerned, is the most advanced society in the entire world, without a shadow of a doubt. Why are London people not being consulted on a matter of European legislation which has such huge ramifications around the world? Why are Europeans' culture overtaking our culture? Why is the European culture dragging us backwards when we are the best placed society to pull European forward? I want you to reflect upon these things, and I want you to think very carefully about why that is the case. Now, I am the only candidate that I know of standing in these European elections, certainly in London, who says that I believe that we should have a complete boycott and a complete sanction against Israel for the human rights atrocities that it commits in Gaza time and time again. I hear from other candidates that they say that when Israel bombs and blasts children to pieces, that they say we should have a ceasefire and we should allow humanitarian aid in. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. Why on earth can you just think children being bombed to pieces? Why do we even have to complain about it? Isn't it blatantly obvious that that is wrong? Yet the European Union has voted to have a special trade agreement with Israel. What on earth, what great thing did Israel do to have a special trade agreement with the European Union? What? And you need to look to see which candidates who voted against that and to see which candidates voted for it. I have campaigned and I have listened to other political parties, including the Liberal Democrat, including the Labour and the Conservatives. Well, if you want to vote Conservative, the first person on the Conservative list for London, Dr. Charles Tannock, is a notorious member of the Friends of Israel. Every article I've read about him, that he has written, is very Islamophobic. He criticises Iran for having a death penalty, but he's quite happy with America having a death penalty. So you need to think about these things. We need to look at some sort of consistency. Why is it that Israel has a special trade agreement and why other countries don't? What worse thing can someone do than blow up children, innocent men and women living in an open air concentration camp, which is nothing less than a prison, who can run nowhere? What worse atrocity have we seen in our times than that? So I'm going to end. I don't need to take up the full 10 minutes. I'm sure you fully understand what I'm talking about, and I'm sure you fully understand that you need to be consulted, and you need to have your views aired, and you need to have your views respected. Until now, I have not yet seen in party politics that the views of Muslims and the views of the general society of British people have been respected or listened to in any way, shape or form. The most recent thing I've seen now, which really disgusts me, is the fact that our Prime Minister marches off to Pakistan and tells the Pakistani President, can you blow up your own people please because there's some terrorists over there? And they do it straight away. Apparently a load of aid was supposed to go to Pakistan, yet we are getting letters in the post asking us to donate money to help the refugees in Pakistan. What happened to that billions of pounds that was supposed to help them? I haven't seen it, you haven't seen it, they haven't seen it. Yet when there was IRA terrorism in this country and we had IRA next door to us, did this government go and bomb Ireland? No. Why was the difference? Ask yourselves, what was the difference? Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much, Suhail, for that. Before I go to the next candidate, I just remembered one thing I forgot to say was we did actually invite the Conservative Party. They've been very elusive. I mean, there's absolutely no reason. I mean, we've had the Labour Party and we've got the second on the list. So, I mean, the Conservatives had plenty of time and opportunity to come and be represented. And they've been very elusive and haven't represented themselves. So I'm not sure what the reasoning is. But having researched, I found that they haven't been going to a lot of the hustings, maybe, especially to Muslim ones, maybe they're worried about, the questions that will be asked. So I just wanted to put that on record, yeah. Thanks. So I'm going to go next to Christopher Le Breton. He is the Lib Dem spokesman.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah, I will get some ideas across to you. I want to speak about 3 or 4 issues, if you like, paint a picture. But by the way, can you hear me? Yeah, cool. And if I speak too fast, which I sometimes do when I get excited, please put a hand up, okay? I thought I'd touch base or give some color on some things: trade, environment, justice, and peace building. And because I think this next Parliament in this next European Parliament session is perhaps the most important ever, because when you look at the multitude of issues which have to be resolved in terms of trade and fairness between countries around the world, and environment and peace building, I think this is when decisions have to be taken. The world is in an extremely serious state environmentally, but also in terms of the conflict between protection and free trade. So let's look at trade. When I worked in the former Soviet Union in the 1990s, in the early 1990s particularly, I remember being in Moscow in 1991, and there was absolutely no free trade at all. I queued for 4 hours in a square in the snow to get my food. And so when I came back to Europe afterwards, I was stunned to see an orange. So I really felt that free trade, yes, it has wonderful, wonderful benefits for us here in the West. And if you look at some people around the world, perhaps a farmer in Pakistan or in Egypt, he can produce beans or something and sell them to Europe, and he gets funds that he can then use to send his kids to school. And it's kind of, it sounds all great. We're happy and they're happy. And then, of course, as you all know, you look at the issues more clearly. You realize that he is having to send more and more beans every year to get the same amount of foreign exchange. He's mining his soil so that he can get foreign exchange, and he's beginning to suffer as the soil fertility goes down, because he's also having to compete with others from around the world. So actually, you begin to see that this free trade system is all very, very well. It helps us here in our countries, but it's actually increasingly very unfair for others around the world. Let's look at justice. There's a lovely film which my Green Party candidate may know of called The Story of Stuff, which looks at how things are produced. And when you see some of the things in the shops here, the prices are incredibly low. And you think, well, how on earth could it be so low? How on earth did it get here? Who paid the real cost for this? It may be a plastic radio costing 5 or 10 quid, a tiny little one. And the fact is that nobody paid the real cost. The bauxite was mined in, say, southern Africa. The oil was mined was drilled in the Middle East. And wherever the mining took place, pollution was just left on the side, and the local people had to suffer the pollution of to the air, the soil, and the poor wages. And then the materials were shipped across, say, to China, where people are living in dreadful conditions in the cities with very low wages, more pollution into the air, more pollution into the water. And then the radios are shipped back to the UK, say, we buy them cheaply, but then they break down after 2 years and they have to be thrown into the environment as landfill. And this is the system we've come up with in our planet. And there is no justice in this. The resources are beginning to run out, and quite urgently we need to come up with a new kind of capitalism. Instead of a capitalism which makes money now and pollutes the earth and leaves it for future generations to tackle, we've got to come up with a capitalism which makes money now but cleans the past and leaves the earth free for the future. That's the challenge. And I know from my experience around the world, many Muslims are among the most dynamic entrepreneurs. So it's almost like in partnership. It's a call. We've got to find this new way of engaging with the planet to have a standard of living that we can all have and have balance without the pollution. That's not my phone, isn't it? Good. Okay. The United Nations on the environment said, and I quote, human activity is putting such a strain on the natural functions of Earth that the ability of the planet's ecosystems to sustain future generations can no longer be taken for granted. This was reported in the Millennium Ecosystems Report, which was released by the United Nations Environment Programme. It's the first time they've actually said that. And I'm aware that nobody else I've met on the hustings is talking about these big issues. These are big ticket issues. We have 90% of the fish in the world's oceans extinct. We have many animals extinct. Many plants, birds we heard in the UK are beginning to die out. Across the world, more problems from pollution, but also climate change. These are big ticket issues, and I see it as the European Parliament's responsibility to come up with a coherent package of measures to tackle this, which will make a difference in Europe, but also around the world. And if you like, as the EU, I see as a benevolent power. Using democracy and full consultation as much as possible. And I take on board what you said, and I've got some examples to share later. But as far as we can have full consultation with other people, the EU should be taking a lead to save the planet. And finally, I just want to touch on peace building. You probably know that the Liberal Democrats were the only party to be consistently against the Iraq war. I need to say no more about that. It goes to the heart of who we are as people. We are a party which is in favour of Turkey joining the European Union if it meets the body of legislation which we call the acquis. And I've said this to my colleagues all over the EU regularly when I go to Brussels. I have no objection at all. In fact, it would be great if Turkey were to join the EU. There's a body of legislation, standards and laws, and any country who meets that, as far as I'm concerned, is very welcome. And after Turkey, we should look at other countries. What about Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan? And one day, who knows, if we can come on to this later. Israel and Palestine I see as one country in future. I don't believe in the two-state solution. I don't think it would work. But imagine a democratic Arab-Jewish country in the Middle East, and then that can join the EU. So, some ideas for the future. I think I'll leave it there. I've given you a sort of a potpourri of ideas. I hope you've understood. I know some of you are sleeping, so I hope it's the heat rather than me. And I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Breton. Okay, last but not least, it's Mahfil Ali for the Green Party. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much for your invitation, Chair. And with apologies, you don't know whether I'm not least, not having heard me yet. But let's hope I can deliver something. In fact, I met two of the panelists on a TV program just about 3 weeks ago now, and I think perhaps we'll all be a bit surprised that although that panel interview was not supposed to be about the expenses debacle, that scandal is still running as we speak. Now, I don't want to dominate my speech with that as well, but I do think it would be worth framing what I'm about to say within the context of that. So what I would want to say is that when we look at the spectacle of politicians from across the parties and the political establishment doing their best to make amends for being found out, and we see, for example, Hazel Blears holding up a £13,000 cheque, what are we supposed to think? See, unfortunately, this undermines our confidence in all politicians and politics generally. The trouble is that politics has become an exercise in media manipulation. And even Hazel Blears at that time, in attempting to make amends, she actually said, I actually care what people think of me. The trouble is, politicians tend to care what people think of you when they've been found out. That isn't actually a good enough reason to do the right thing, that you think you'll be found out. So you actually want politicians, and you would expect everybody to say this, but you need to identify for yourself who are those politicians who believe in what they're saying. So I would put it to you, and you still have to judge with all politicians, including green ones, where they stand, whether you can believe in them, what confidence you have in them. You have to find a way of assessing that. And I would say if there is a sense in which the Green Party differs, it's that we're looking at the long term. We haven't been in politics because we wanted to be popular. For sure, it isn't the first party you'd go into if you wanted to get elected quickly. We've been talking about things that everybody's known about, scientists have been talking about for decades now, and one of those being the threat of climate change. So you might consider, firstly, that those politicians who have an entitlement to believe are those who have been talking about things for the good of the nation and for the good of other people, even though it hasn't necessarily been that popular. So let me just give three general themes, if I may. First one I've kind of touched on, which is the issue of climate change. Now, the temperature record is going up at an exponential rate. The carbon record is going up at an exponential rate. You know, the planet is burning up. And even within our generation, we're seeing, you know, ice caps are melting at an astonishing rate. And then it's very difficult now to find a place to ski in Europe. So this is happening in our generation. And the Green Party understands the urgency of this, the need for action. And politics is one place where we can legitimately coordinate socially in order to address these, not just as individuals, but together. In the same way, for example, that you might think it's not in your interest to have to pay the congestion charge. This is a relatively minor example, but when that was implemented, you may have thought it wasn't in your interest, but collectively, you felt actually it was the right thing to do, even though you may have had to pay something, because there's the cost to the environment. It could be the air pollution, or it could be the fact that nobody's getting anywhere very quickly. But the fact is, there are things in politics that it's worth doing for its own sake, okay? And in the same way, our party isn't just about environmental issues, because these are interrelated. So we're advocating what we're calling a Green New Deal. That is to say, a whole raft of policies which helps us to get people out of unemployment or unsustainable jobs. It's actually no good the government pumping money into car industries when nobody wants to buy a car, or they can't afford a car, or these cars are actually going to harm the environment because they're pumping out oil pollution. So what we need to think about is a massive investment in green technology, energy, renewable energy, and energy efficiency measures. Think also about the fact that people are suffering right now from climate change. So climate change is related to injustice around the world. I was reading, it was a Gulf paper actually, the Gulf newspaper. They were majoring on a cyclone in Bangladesh, at which tens and thousands of people had actually been displaced. And that's happening as we speak. So there's a connection here, a deep connection, an interrelation between acting on climate change and helping to take people out of poverty and the injustice, which breeds migration, which isn't just economic migration, but out of necessity. So 2 other issues, if I may. Quality of life. I think, and again, I don't profess to know what your needs are, yes? I mean, we all have multiple identities. You could be a Muslim on one day and you may not be a Muslim another day. That is a matter for an individual. And not all Muslims think alike. So I don't profess to know what it is that is specifically in your interest, but we can consult, as Sohail was saying. That's an important concept. What is in your interest? But I would argue that one of the things that we found to be very wanting in the 21st century liberal capitalist age is the idea of consumerism. Okay? Not only is this harming the planet, but it's been found that it doesn't actually make people happy. So one good reason why green politicians wouldn't be going into developing their property portfolios, besides the fact that we didn't have enough time to do that, is we know it doesn't make us any happier. And studies show this, that the more you earn, the more you think you can't afford what you really need. So these are looking for false idols here. They don't actually give us any happiness. That quality of life is to be found in the family, in social cohesion, in the equality and diversity that comes from that fellow feeling with your neighbor. Lastly, I'll just say a little bit about the human rights framework, which Greens operate within and lobby in the European Parliament on. And if we think about the international arena that, for example, the Middle East conflict flares up in, why are we asking, for example, I mean, we're entitled to ask for international investigations into whether war crimes were committed by the Israelis, for example, during the onslaught on Gaza. But we can actually see it with our own eyes, can't we? We can actually see it with our own eyes, and this is happening as we speak. So the Green Party is the only party, actually, who has been arguing for the suspension of the EU-Israeli trade agreement. And that's just the pinnacle. We should not be doing that. The head of the Lib Dem list, actually, has been arguing, and I think she's ingenuous in that, but she needs to be interrogated on why she thinks that increasing solidarity with Israel economically is going to increase the chance that they will see the error of their ways. Okay, well, I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for that. I guess I'm going to give the mic to the floor now if there are any questions.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. All 3 of the 4 candidates mentioned something about the environment, and I have a question for each one. Starting with Mary, you mentioned that you had worked on some sort of legislation on the European level on reducing emissions. What sort of effect are we going to see in London because of the legislation that has been passed on the European level? What sort of effect are we going to see in London? Are we going to see an increase in petrol prices? I mean, are we going to see an increase in our travel costs? And is there a constructive plan that the Labour Party has? Christopher, you mentioned that you wanted that the Lib Dems were going to set up some sort of plan up that cleans up the past and sets up on the future. Just wanted to ask more questions of that. Does your party have a constructive plan when it comes to the environment and setting the environment right? Shahrar, you mentioned that that the Green Party has since there's a Green New Deal that you mentioned with this investing in green technology. Is that green technology based in London? Are we going to see any effect on the ground? Are we going to see more jobs that are available to citizens of London?
Thank you. It's a very comprehensive question. Perhaps if I could just deal with the things you specifically asked me. I think that there's two parts to the question. There's the European-wide work that's being done on the environment, and there's the specific impact on London. One of the things that the EU's been working hard on is the emissions trading scheme, whereby individual member states are allocated an amount of emissions, and if one member state doesn't use their full quota, they can sell it to another member state, but basically it keeps the amount of emissions throughout the EU at an agreed level. That's been in place for a few years now, and I think it's actually been a good initiative. I mean, there are criticisms of it, and it can go further, but at least it's established a principle that emissions should be controlled, and it is doing that. The questions of emissions also come up in relation to car manufacture, and this does affect London as well as more generally. It's been very difficult to get car manufacturers to take the whole question of reducing emissions and particulates as well as carbon emissions on board. I mean, they really have not wanted to know, with few honourable exceptions like Toyota, who've actually developed hybrid cars. And I actually think one of the problems that car manufacturers are in such difficulty at the moment is that they're not keeping up with demand and what people want. And that's been quite a big EU thing, actually, to try and reduce car emissions and improve and actually put things like converters on cars to reduce emissions. So that's on the sort of global thing. Obviously, the car issue does have a big impact on London. There aren't any plans at the moment to increase petrol prices or travel costs or anything. I mean, we don't actually have a London-wide policy to do that. What the other things, though, that I want to talk about is green jobs. I mean, that's something that's talked about quite a lot in Europe, and the number of jobs in the environment industries is increasing and will continue to increase. The other thing is renewable energy, which has been quite a significant initiative in the EU. I'm actually on the committee that deals with energy policy, and it's actually been one of my Labour Party colleagues, Eluned Morgan from Wales, who's been taking the whole energy package through, the recent energy package through the committee, and we have actually established a target of 10% of energy should come from renewable sources, which may not sound very much, but it is quite a big step forward, and I think that will continue because there's a big commitment to do that. So I think there is progress being made. It may not be as fast as some people would like, and it's not, I think, as fast as I ideally would like, but we are going in the right direction, and there are some of us working very hard to push it further.
Thank you, Mary. Christopher, do you know?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. You said to me in your question, you referred to the cleaning up the past and the new capitalism as if it was a Lib Dem policy. It's not a Lib Dem policy. It's my own personal belief of an issue that has to be tackled. But within our party, we are a broad church, and more of us are realizing we have to do something, so that some of us are beginning to speak, if you like, out of turn. Whereas, in another sense, you might say Sarah Ludford spoke out of turn. She's entirely on her own when it comes to Israel. But I was saying something that I feel has to be raised. We're all individuals in the Liberal Democrats, and I'm passionate about a number of issues, and I will use my position to raise them. Do we have a constructive plan? Well, the environment runs through all our policies, and Friends of the Earth recently gave us the top billing as the greenest political party in the UK. We can still improve how we go, but I'm quite happy that how we're doing. For instance, on climate change, the science is now worse than it was when the climate change bill was drawn up. So we need to be making much more radical steps than even that bill has foresees. But already, the UK is the most advanced country in the world in terms of having a bill on the statute books. No other country has done it. Okay, the proof is to implement it, and I'm in a backhanded way endorsing the Labour government. They've at least had the guts with the support of others to put it through. Okay, it's not all the answer, but well done on them. We now need to make it work, and need to make it work more quickly. And this is where, perhaps in the European Parliament, you see the differences. the Lib Dems have been pushing for against the third runway and for the clean-up of the River Thames. So 2 local examples. We in the Lib Dems are very happy to use EU legislation to make a difference in the UK and for instance to have a full environmental impact assessment of the third runway at Heathrow. The Tories are against using EU legislation for what it's designed, and Labour in this instance is in favour of the third runway. When it comes to the Thames, we'll use EU legislation to, if you like, help people at a local level. We have other examples. We'll use the EU level to provide, to do the things at that level which can't be done at the local level. Finally, what I would say, and I would just come back to the thing about the Green New Deal, because this is one of our key pillars in our manifesto this time. We want to see a new cadre of green-collar workers, so people who are trained up to retrofit our housing, because our housing stock is pretty poor when it comes to energy efficiency. So in terms of insulation, eco-efficiency, microgeneration at a local level, we've got to radically train up people across the country to be able to install things on the roofs, in our gardens, so we are much greener. And then finally, I would say, this is the other side of this, is at the international level. There's a lovely scheme which the Greens and the Liberal Democrats are supporting in the European Parliament, which is the Desertec scheme of renewable energy, which links Iceland, the geothermal energy in Iceland, with the wind and wave energy from the UK and Ireland, with photovoltaic energy in the continental Europe, and the solar power, concentrated solar power from the Muslim countries of North Africa. It's a wonderful partnership between all countries to stabilize not only our economies but also the economies of North Africa, and tackle our environment and have a renewable energy resource for generations to come to replace oil and nuclear. So in one sense, that's environment, that's energy, and that's green jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Sure.
Thank you for your question. It's one for each of us in a slightly different take on that question, I think. It's very difficult. There's no easy answer. Politicians can implement laws, but we need to be able to follow them, and we need to make sure they're good for the job. So what I would say for a start is that a lot of reducing our carbon footprint, if you will, and the amount of energy that we actually use is also looking at our lifestyles. And that was part of the point of bringing up the idea of the quality of life. Because actually you'll find, for example, that if you move towards more human scale options of transport, could be walking or cycling, that's an interesting idea, walking or cycling, these are actually quite enjoyable, in terms of exercise, enjoying your environment, so long as the roads aren't clogged up. So what the Greens, for example, in the London Assembly have been doing, particularly under the previous mayor, was working very hard in setting budgets and getting more money for those kind of schemes, and maybe opening up the waterways as well. And not making the car our enemy as such, who would think that, but moving towards environmentally sort of carbon neutral forms of transportation as well. Now, unfortunately, when you look at the options for that, there aren't that many around, because even if you're going to source it by electricity, you need to make sure that the electricity is from renewable sources, and you're wondering up what's actually contributing to the mix. Even if you look at biodiesel, which is a very big problem, African and Asian states have come together to say this is a very bad thing for them in terms of affecting what they're left to eat. So it's understood that many of the technologies originally pursued are actually harming the planet and making things worse. So I would want to emphasize the need for lifestyle changes and ways in which we can make those attractive just by understanding, for example, how much better it would be for us to have a better work-life balance, for example, or to be able to grow our own food. So Greens, everything's interconnected. Greens have been pushing for more allotments throughout London. And to be able to grow your own food means that you're going to lower your carbon footprint automatically, because every time you visit a supermarket, there's the packaging, there's the waste, and there's the fact it's being flown from sometimes halfway around the world because it isn't seasonal and it isn't local. So thought of like that, we can reduce our carbon footprint, particularly in the United Kingdom, which we need to do through this kind of joined up approach.
Thank you, Sharon.
Chair, can I just come in on this as well?
Okay, quick.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I know you didn't ask the question of me directly. The fact is, climate change is a fact, and we have to stop it. And the only way we're going to stop it is by legislation, which is why the European Union is a great forum to do that. And if we look at various things, for example, we've had seatbelts in cars for many years, but we had to have legislation to actually make us wear them. And we've seen serious injury cut immensely because we now wear seatbelts. The point is, though, when we try to look for various green solutions, there seems to be so much conflicting information out there. You know, we hear some people saying that wind turbines are good, and then others saying that, well, no, they don't actually work, and they'll only work in the North Sea. I've tried various things to find, when I was doing new plumbing, to find, do I use heat pumps, air-sourced heat pumps, ground-sourced heat pumps? Can I use a wind turbine? Where on earth do I get photovoltaic cells from? And it's such a difficult minefield out there to just find out what the right thing to do is. I ended up with an air-sourced heat pump, and now I think I've done the wrong thing. And maybe invested money completely in the wrong way. So there needs to be much better information, but it seems like various political parties want to argue with each other in order to gain some sort of popular message out of it, rather than getting down to the nitty-gritty. But I'll tell you something else that's important. And that is that natural resources, in terms of renewable energy, are severely underdeployed in various hot countries, especially in terms of photovoltaic, especially in terms of just using sun's radiation to heat water, for example. And the underdeveloped countries don't have the money, and to be quite frank with you, the issues and social issues that they have, green issues, are pretty much not that important. You need to deal with more immediate issues of health and sanitation, etc. I think it's really incumbent upon the European Union and richer countries to start making sure that aid is going, not to government pockets, but to various agencies that can help develop renewable energies in those countries. Because if we're really concerned about global warming, and it's a global warming, it's not about just limiting emissions in Europe. It's also about setting up infrastructures in other countries so they don't tread the same path that we're treading. And it seems that, I mean, I've heard about your the initiative that you talked about, Chris, and it's excellent. But that can be rolled out across the world far more easier than is currently happening. But it seems to be that politics is getting in the way. And, you know, we see so much aid going to various countries, but it's not going to where it has to go. It ends up going to politicians and governments. So I just wanted to say that, you know, I believe in, that we have to stop global warming, but there are various avenues that we can pursue to do that.
Thank you. So, please go ahead.
Okay, good evening. Thank you very much for coming up here and talking to us at these hustings. I'd just like to point out that the Conservatives have not bothered turning up, and I think that Muslims should reciprocate come election day. My question, actually I've got two questions, are directed to Mary and Christopher. And they are, Gaza has been blockaded for a number of years. Do you back a boycott of Israeli goods? If not, why not? And I have a follow-up question for Christopher, which is, Sarah Ludford is a Zionist. What number is she on the Lib Dem list, please?
Okay, great. I'll jump with the lines then there. Well, on Gaza, my view is a blockade of Israel won't actually make much of a difference. I'm very, very glad that President Obama has told Netanyahu that no more settlements to be built. I think it's the first positive sign I've heard from an American president for a decade. I mean, for me, it's a very good first step. Our party is about to renew its policy on this, but the number 2 candidate and myself, I'm number 4, are of the same mind that the two-state solution as proposed, even by Obama and the others, will not work. We have to go for a single-state solution. And I want us to redouble our efforts now to work towards that. A few years ago, I mentioned this to representatives of the Knesset, and they listened politely, but you could see they had no no serious intention to listen. But if we can get the European Parliament to endorse this, and I believe more and more of us are realizing the two-state solution won't work, if we get the European Parliament to endorse this, and I believe there are sensible people in the administration in the US, I think we can force a change. If Israel doesn't play by the, doesn't follow the opinion of the Parliament and Europe, then boycott. But my personal view is that boycott has to be a last resort, because boycott often helps often punishes poor people who are who suffer. I mean, remember, there are many Arabs in Israel, so have it there as a possibility on the table, but don't use it on the initially.
But Gaza has been blockaded right now, and it has been blockaded for a number of years, and the EU backs that blockade.
Well, I know, and it's appalling. I've got friends who are working in Gaza. It's absolutely outrageous. But I want to see much more attention now on a one-state solution. I don't think we should reciprocate by just boycotting Israel. Let's actually get Netanyahu together with Barroso, head of the parliament, and say enough's enough.
When would you like to lift the boycott of Gaza then?
I'd like to do it tomorrow. It's outrageous.
Have you called for that?
Sorry?
Have you called for that?
But I'm number 4 on the candidate. I appreciate the question. It's the first time I've been asked this. Have I called for it? No, I haven't.
Has your party?
Well, Sarah Ludford, this is your second point. Sarah Ludford is a Zionist. She's completely out of step with the rest of the party. Completely out of step. The number 2 and the number 4 myself, we do not agree with her at all. But nonetheless, we're a broad church. She's out of step. She's had her knuckles wrapped. They've been wrapped again. So there you are. There's one Zionist in the party, and there are 2 or 3 anti-Zionists.
Christopher, my question was, what number is she? What number candidate?
She's number 1. She's the lead candidate.
She's the lead candidate
number 1.
in your party?
Yeah.
She's a Zionist?
Yeah.
Right. I know, I do understand the feelings on this subject. And I would like to start by saying that I actually visited Israel about 2 years ago or so. And I didn't see Gaza, but I did actually see the West Bank. I saw the wall, and I saw how difficult it is for non-Israelis to get around. I did actually experience, the blockade, experience the checkpoints. So, I have actually seen it, and I have to say I was very shocked by what I saw. And it does make you realise that although I still intellectually support the idea of a two-state solution, it would be very difficult now because of the way that the boundaries have been drawn. Israel has done it in such a way to make any sort of dividing things up, any sort of two-state solution, actually incredibly difficult. So I do recognise that. While I was there, I actually did go into Palestinian territories, and I did go to Ramallah as well. So I did actually speak to some of the Palestinian leaders. So I did actually see both sides, and I came away actually feeling that this, there are some problems in the world which appear very intractable, and I felt that kind of emotional response to it, which is not very helpful because it does need to be resolved, and it's only going to be resolved, I think, by world leaders, I think, actually getting together to deal with it, which is why I also agree that the Obama-Netanyahu talks, that getting together has been helpful, and I think we need to see an awful lot more of that. So I think that's where I stand on it. I still do support a two-state solution, but I think it's going to be very hard, and I think the situation in Israel-Palestine is getting progressively worse. And the specific question about Gaza and the blockade, no, I have to admit I haven't called for a lifting of the blockade. I also agree that a boycott of Israel would probably not be a very good idea, because boycotts actually, I don't think, achieve anything very much, and I think all they do is end up making the poor people, even poorer. It did work eventually in South Africa, which I think was a different situation, and it wasn't. It was
Zimbabwe.
It was a fairly international boycott. I'm not.
Iran.
I'm not necessarily.
Cuba.
In many of those countries, boycotts have actually had the effect of actually impoverishing poor people even more. If it didn't do that, yes, I would say I would have no problem with it. But I am concerned with a boycott of Israel may actually harm those very people that you're trying to actually help.
Mary, doesn't it come across as slightly
That's the
hypocritical?
point I'm making.
Does it come across as slightly hypocritical that you're not calling for a boycott of Israel, but you are not doing anything about a boycott of Gaza?
I freely admit that. I have not taken an initiative on that. I have actually, until I started this campaign and until I actually did the television programme, I had not received representations. I now know how strongly you feel about this, and I will go back and do something about it.
Thank you.
Okay, can I just take a question from Mahfil, please?
Well,
I mean, you're saying that it'll affect the ordinary people in those areas, yeah? Have you asked them that do you want to have boycott? Why is it that whenever we ask for from outside, when we ask for boycott, the Palestinians support us? So the Palestinians themselves want the boycott.
That's fine. No, I haven't had those conversations with them. Now, you know,
How can you make a decision
I am listening to
on
what
this
you-
issue when you are a member of European Parliament?
I am listening to what you're saying to me, and I am taking all of this very seriously. I mean, that is all I can say now. I mean, I haven't done anything about it in the past, but I'm now beginning to understand just how strongly all of you feel about it.
Chair, can I just say that there have been various demonstrations over the years, many of which I have attended, and the entire body of the British public, including Jewish people and people of all faiths and all communities, have been demonstrating, including and marching in front of the Houses of Parliament for decades, complaining about Israel and asking for boycotts of Israel. Jewish people standing up in Trafalgar Square saying boycott Israel. I find it really surprising that any member, any person in the entire UK doesn't know that there's a strength of feeling about this. We've just seen the strength of feeling of British people on one child called baby Peter, and how he suffered, and the strength of feeling of the British people that because of this one child the sentence was not sufficient on the mother who didn't actually kill him. She didn't actually kill him, but she stood by. She stood by, and was not sufficient on the perpetrator of crime. This is the strength of feeling of British people. We hate to see children being murdered. That's it. End of story. So it's really surprising that our politicians are so out of touch that they don't know that the British public, not just Muslims, the entire British public are so enraged that children are being murdered. Israel was the boyfriend who killed baby P, and the EU is the mother who supported it.
Could I just react also to what's been said, even though the question wasn't addressed to me, and I hope it wasn't addressed to me for the right reasons, I assume. But basically, the questioner also put it very well to Mary just now under a bit of cross-examination there, when he kind of said, well, it's one thing not to call for an embargo or a blockade on Israel. It's another thing to do nothing about the blockade which you say is generally not very useful when it's imposed upon another country. So that does seem a little bit like double standards. And unfortunately, that's one of the things which I think angers people who aren't actually themselves involved in those oppressive situations. Chris Le Breton earlier described it as outrageous, and I would, well, we have the power of speech here. I would say it's unconscionable. It's desperate. Yeah, words do not adequately describe what's going on there. The International Court ruled in 2004, as long ago as that the wall, for example, was contrary to international law. It should be dismantled immediately and reparations paid to the Palestinians. Nothing is being done about that. No further legislation is required in the European Parliament or any parliament, yes? This is happening now on our doorstep. We have Geneva Conventions and we have UN resolutions which are being flouted and transgressed. The trouble is that if you do nothing, and if it's too convenient to say that a blockade won't work, it's too convenient to say that there's no scope for economic sanctions. It's much too convenient to have an EU-Israeli trade agreement and say, well, actually, I don't think it would work to do the opposite. It's much too convenient. More like the reality is that we're increasing their credibility. We're saying that it's becoming normalized. They would love for us to go and visit Israel on holiday, yes? How normal is that? They would love us to vote in the Eurovision Song Contest for Israel. How disgraceful is that? So it's a normalization process. You know, I've heard Sarah Ludford, and I would not choose to describe anybody as Zionist without defining that term. It's a loaded term, but Chris wants to define that or accept your usage of it. I don't wish to do that. I simply wish to say that let's look at it just in terms of human rights. We have gross human rights violations. Everybody worth their salt knows when an injustice has occurred and has to be righted. We have a desperate situation going on. Right, sorry, lastly, because actually I'm getting rubbed up the wrong way now by Mary, because you said some earlier things and it reminds me, you talked about the Labour government bringing in the incitement to racial hatred. It was an incitement to religious hatred as far as I'm aware. Moreover, this government has been responsible for the most repressive anti-terror legislation, which has been damaging and harmful to race relations in this country, if anything is. We have all kinds of anti-terror legislation which has been misappropriated and misused, and we have stop and searches, and we can discuss that later if you wish.
Can I just come in? Just very quickly, to clarify one thing. Sarah Ludford is pro-Israel. And for me, that's what I mean by Zionist. She's pro-Israel. The number 2 and the number 4 are not.
Yeah. I've got a couple of questions as well. Some of those might have already been answered. And one of the ones is, how would you support a law against the religious discrimination? I would expect that from the two gentlemen on the ends. The answer would be pretty fine. But the question for Labour and the Liberals is that how would you go about when you are going to the EU? The second thing is, I think I just want to make it quite clear that when I hear for a sort of a Labour or Liberal bashing just because you happen to be here, I think it is just goes to show the strength of feeling over here. And this is what you are looking at is a lot more of the grown-up people. You need to go outside and see what the feelings are like with the younger members of our family. And they are, in some cases, you could probably call them extreme. And the reason for that is the extreme, inefficient, and I would say terribly carelessness on the majority of the ruling and the other parties who couldn't care less about the feelings of the other people. So therefore, they are inciting the hatred, if that is the right word. To go and have a sort of an uprising, and then only thing that they can find is, let's find somebody who will go and catch them. Let's go and collect 15 or 20 of these people, have these headlines in the newspapers, and then everything is going to go funny, and everything is going to be, after that, is going to be all right. And then what happens? I mean, you know, I'll just take up this opportunity of saying that previously 11 or 13 of these young men was collected from the universities and other places. And they were either deported, 1 or 2 of them, others were released. When they were captured in the first place, there was a big hoo-ha about what they expected them to have done. But everything then just went quiet. Nobody heard anything, no newspapers, no headlines. None of the major parties came out and said that they were sorry because they've done something wrong. And they should have done that. And I think if you people have got any salt in yourselves as well, when you stand up to be sort of voted, you must also stand up for those people who are voting you in. Thank you.
I think there was more of a comment, unless somebody wants to come back on that. Okay, please.
Two questions. First, for the Labour candidate. You mentioned in your early introduction about the French way, how women are not allowed to wear hijab in schools and public places. There are a lot of people in England and Great Britain who think that Britain should go that way, which is quite for Muslim women. What steps are you taking to ensure that that doesn't happen over here?
Yeah. Okay. As I said, I was one of the people who signed the written declaration in the Parliament. The French position, I mean, I think the French position is inherently racist. I mean, they do have a justification in that France is a secular state, and therefore they don't believe that they should have any religious symbols worn in schools or public places. they're very disingenuous about this because they don't actually object to Christian religious symbols. I mean, they don't actually object to people wearing crosses and that kind of thing. So it does have very racist overtones the way they interpret it, and whether you view the hijab as a religious symbol or not. I mean, that was what this particular thing was about, and that was what our written declaration was about. Very much supporting the right of Muslim women to wear the hijab, and indeed, you know, other religions to wear things which are appropriate to their religion, which is my perspective. I mean, I think, you know, I don't think there should be discrimination, and I think people should have the freedom to, you know, wear what they like, provided it's decent, you know. and I believe that very strongly, actually, and I would stand up for that. Always.
Are you taking steps to ensure that EU doesn't make it a law which is Europe-wide? And
there is absolutely no indication at the moment that the EU is going to make it the French position EU-wide. If there was ever any hint of it, I mean, I would certainly be up there doing my very best to stop it, as would a lot of other colleagues as well.
I have a question for the Green Party candidate as well, if that's all right. Going back to the green issues, is the Green Party lobbying the government to give grants to people to put PV panels on roofs, not measly £400, which you have to jump through hoops to get at the moment?
Yes.
And the permitted development rights don't go far enough to allow you to put solar panels on your roof.
No, you're right. And in fact, Sohail was also correct in saying that there is obviously scope for legislation. And it's got to be the right legislation for a start, and then you've got to be able to implement it. We've seen that this government's grant has run out, you know, within a couple of weeks, and it might be an annual fund that they've got there. So people don't have enough to even do their own micro-generation. I think the other point, I mean, one of the initiatives that Jean Lambert has been pushing very strongly, and she's written a report on this, which you can find on her website, is to do with home insulation. So there's a lot of cavity walls without insulation, which can be filled, and that will also reduce you know, energy wastage from the home. So when you think about that, but this government has a habit actually of pursuing very tokenistic short-term gestures. I mean, think about the car scrappage scheme. Again, if you think about the amount of energy that goes into constructing a vehicle, or you know, all the steam that's required, all the raw materials that's required, it isn't going to be cost effective for everybody to be replacing their car simply if they've got a cash incentive to do so. It's much better for us to get into a state of mind, this is the sort of the quality of life issue again, where we're repairing things. We should have a repair industry up and running again. People should be thinking about using things for as long as possible, because there's the so-called embedded energy in a vehicle. And so let's get to a state where instead of it being cool to be sort of driving a new car with a new number plate, it's actually cool, if whatever we want to call it. Yeah, it's a status symbol to be keeping something on the road for as long as possible. And I think the equation that has to be looked at is not just what's coming out of the engine. If that person is determined to be driving, it's overall what is the cost to the earth, including scrapping a car and having to buy a new one. What is the cost to the earth? We can't afford to be going on like that.
My question more is with regards to microgeneration.
Yes.
And instead of building a nuclear station,
yes,
if government gave grants to people to put PV panels, it would take away the need to, well, in long run, and it will be much greener as well, rather than having a nuclear station. So is the Green Party working towards that, or is that not the issue the Green Party is covering? No?
The answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
I think Sohail wanted to come back on the previous question.
Just want to come to this point about the hijab and what France has done. I think it's not wise for us to say when the European Parliament tries to propose a ban on hijab, then we will act. I'm afraid that's too late. France has done something which is racist, full stop. Let's not try to give them any excuses. I've written to the French ambassador when they applied this racist law, And I asked him on what basis did he determine the hijab to be a religious symbol. You know what reply I got? No reply, because you're not going to get a coherent reply from a racist. What we need to do is to see British MEPs, which they haven't done, is to uphold British ethics, British way of life in the European Parliament, and push a motion to take France to the European Court for racism. It's as simple as that. And we haven't done that, and that's what we should be doing. If we really cared about it, and this is the term, isn't it? If we really care, not if we talk we care, but if we really care, and we really care about racism, we should be fighting against it in all its forms, wherever it occurs, whenever it occurs. Thank you very much.
Okay, Gina.
Questions to actually everybody on the panel, really, because Europe is actually facing a problem, has been facing a problem for a long time about people coming across the borders. The issues about are we to become a fortress Europe or not, or what are the solutions to the problems that we are facing? Because obviously these people are migrants, economic migrants, and it's going to get worse because of the situation that the world is in at the moment. And we've seen a huge influx. We've recently heard on the news that people from Afghanistan are also sort of now in mass numbers coming into Europe. What is your views and what are your party's views about how you're going to deal with this situation?
Okay. Who would like to take it first?
Sure. Well, I mean, the EU is pursuing a blue card system, and the trouble is, you know, in terms of it might be better than what the UK government is doing, but essentially we need to be moving towards something which is qualitative. Okay, you may want to have some kind of managed process, but you've got to make sure you're treating people as human beings. That's to say, if somebody comes to this country to work and they're benefiting us, not in terms of the economy, leave that aside, just in terms of the benefit to us, right, and benefiting themselves. And if they wish to have a family here, then they should not be penalized from doing so. And moreover, if a student finds that he wants to work here, then that also is a possibility. So we need to move to a situation also where, you know, the Green Party frames the whole immigration debate in more historical terms, in more social justice terms, in terms of the reasons why people are fleeing. And I mentioned earlier that it isn't just economic migration. A lot of it is fighting for their lives. We have to bear that in mind. And so we have a duty, we have an obligation under you know, human rights framework, you know, not to turn people away who are in those situations. So we need to welcome them, and we need to think twice about the fact that so much, you know, of the resources of this country historically, and even now as we speak, yes, is to the loss of other people around the world. You know, there are going to be potentially more wars in the future, or more injustice occurring for natural resources, the main one being water, and not just space. So let's think holistically. I mean, in this country, again, we're fantastically integrated. When we have even terror-type scenarios, terrible and unconscionable that they are, I actually find London is very resilient. And I think that part of that is, the resilience is because of our diversity and our toleration and understanding and automatic identification with people around the world, not even simply because we happen to share their ethnicity. It's because we have a kind of a human identity, and that is a common spirit. If I, very quickly, quick anecdote, when I pick up the phone and ask, you know, for train information, and I'm clearly being put through to Delhi, and that person is both speaks better English and is educated and proud of what they're doing, so I understand that we're living in a very sort of global milieu. And when you frame it in those ways, you know, let's cut through, you know, all the xenophobia. Let's think, you know, let's be friendly, let's be positive, let's find ways of managing the whole population. And if we're going to be asking people to integrate and speak, you know, the national languages, well, let's make sure that everybody's doing that, you know, including the indigenous population, so-called.
Thank you. Can we keep our answers short, because we've got a few more questions and we've limited time. Thanks very much. Christopher, do you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. Well,
I'm I'm concerned about this idea of Fortress Europe. I hear it on the doorstep. More and more people talking about protection in Fortress Europe, and I just have to get across to them how naive. And when you when you go through all the costs to you, they actually realise it's not a sensible solution. But the BNP and UKIP are peddling this. I think the EU, to answer the question, the EU has the opportunity to see this from a global perspective, and the vast numbers of people who want to come to Europe. Naturally, because they see it on television from around the world, that as my Green Party colleague has said, that they are fleeing their states for both economic and political reasons. And I think this is a problem that no politician in the last 40, 50 years has addressed properly. We have more and more failed states which are relying upon EU funds for government. So there's a problem to be dealt with. But there is a solution. The Desertec system that I talked about, this idea of this renewable energy grid, which links together North Africa and Europe. This is a system which will stabilize the North African economies and slow down the immigration from North Africa and even the Sahel, Senegal, Gambia, into Europe. Because for the first time there is a stable economy for those countries. They are able to, if you like, export their solar power to Europe and get money which stabilizes them. It's a concept that can be applied elsewhere in the world to harness the power of the sun renewably. I think this is one practical answer. And it needs countries working together, but this is one practical answer which will stabilize states and stop this huge immigration of people. It'll encourage people to stay in their countries. I want to mention one other thing there about the UK. I do find that the UK immigration system all over the world is incredibly racist with a capital R. I've got friends who are Muslim, who are Buddhist, and from elsewhere in the world, and the hassle and the rudeness and the aggression that they have had from UK government offices around the world makes them cry, and it makes me to be very, very embarrassed. So there is a small element that needs to be resolved. It's unacceptable the way some wonderful people are treated around the world just for trying to get into Britain on honourable reasons to see their family or to come and work, because there are jobs here for them. So we need to tackle that, but we also need to tackle the global level, and that's where the European Parliament is perfect.
Okay, thank you. Sir?
On the matter of immigration, the reason I'm actually quite keen on the European Union, and what it is because it's a common market, and it's a group of loads of nations getting together, and by doing so, it minimises the chance of conflicts and battles and wars. And I'm actually very pro having a global society, a global community. I think it's a very pro-Islamic ideal. But when we look at immigration, we have to look at it in a holistic way. What I'm talking about is this. There is no point us complaining about people wanting to come to Europe to have a better life, just as economic migrants, if we are responsible for blowing up their countries. None of us want to live in Afghanistan. So obviously people from Afghanistan would want to come here. The other thing we also have to look at very carefully, is that when we trade with other countries, we need to pay them a fair price for their produce so that they can earn some money. Not huge conglomerates going over there, and as they do to British farmers in this country, but huge conglomerates going to other countries paying people a pittance. That has got to stop. And thirdly, we're also doing another thing in Europe. We're taking away their human skilled resource. When we don't have doctors and nurses, we just pull them out of Africa, pull them out of India, pull them out of Egypt. Well, then those people don't have their doctors and nurses and their teachers anymore. So what do you want them to do? Of course, in one sense, I said they have every right to come here because we haven't paid them a proper price for their produce. We haven't, and we can do so. We can do so. We've taken away their skilled labour, which we shouldn't have, and we've done nothing to be responsible for that, to put investment back into those countries and back into those places. So I think we should be very careful if we're going to become sort of anti-immigrants. We need to take on the responsibility as a rich society with lots of resources. Thank you.
Yeah, there are various forms of immigration and movement of people, and I just think we need to be a bit clear about what we're talking about. Obviously, there are people asylum seekers who who have to go to other countries because they're facing persecution in their own country. The EU was actually in the process of introducing a common immigration and asylum policy, and this has been something which I think the government is making some progress on, though I think not enough. I recently went to one of the asylum centres where asylum seekers are actually, put pending decisions being made about their cases, and it was a completely horrific experience. I mean, this was just the most awful place. I mean, I have been to worse places in my career in social welfare, but this was pretty low down on the list, actually. And I think it is quite wrong, actually, that asylum seekers who've done nothing wrong are actually kept in such conditions. So I would like to see that looked at, and really the whole policy speeded up. I think part of the problem is that the government doesn't put enough resources into it. I don't think it's necessarily the policy. I mean, if actually applications would turn around quickly, you wouldn't need to put them in awful conditions. And the EU itself is working towards a common policy on asylum and immigration, which is actually probably quite sensible, because there have been instances such as French actually offloading people to other countries, which is not helpful. So I think, if all EU member states had equal responsibility and had to do the same things, it would help. I mean, there's also the question of the movement of labour within the European Union, which has been particularly problematic with the enlargement of the EU and Eastern European people coming to this country. A lot of them haven't stayed very long and have gone back home when they've earned a bit of money and done whatever else they wanted to do here. And I think on the whole that's been positive, because they did come, most of them, over when the economy here was better, and they did very valuable jobs. And I think we should always recognise this when we're talking about immigration, that most of the people who come here actually do valuable things, often jobs that people who live here, indigenous people if you like, don't want to do, and we should never lose sight of that. The other thing, in terms of movement of people, is the criminal element. I mean, I've done a lot of work on trafficking, particularly of women and children, and there is a growing movement, and then also there's the whole question of gang masters and exploitation of people, and there is a growing criminal element which really does exploit people and moves and exploits people against their will, and I think we must put more resources into that to prevent that happening.
Yeah, can I take your question?
Is there a link between terrorism and foreign policy?
Simple answer, yes, of course there is.
You'd get a round of applause if that was question time.
I could say yes, but I'm trying to think much more. I can understand terrorism is a result of people are being trapped and imprisoned and denied the opportunity for self-expression and for living their lives with their families. So eventually that forces them to become strong campaigners and then terrorists. So in a sense, of course there is. My passion is for the EU to become a benevolent power to spread democracy and freedoms around the world, and there's an awful lot to do, whether it's looking at trade and looking at the way we deal with other countries. But I think I have a vision that one day we will have a calm world where people are living calmly with each other and we won't have terrorism.
I would like to say yes, I think it is, but I think we were talking about Israel earlier, which I think has been the cause of some forms of terrorism. But I also think that domestic policies have something to do with it. When racist policies, to put it that way, are applied, and people who aren't white actually live in poor areas and don't have jobs, and they begin to, understandably feel very alienated, and that I think has been a huge amount of domestic terrorism in this country, and I think we are all responsible for that, and I think this government and previous governments have been responsible for it, and I think we really need to think about policies of how we actually ensure that people have jobs that can live